Hear Me See Me podcast is sponsored by Zenoti, the #1 cloud software for salons and spas. Because when people feel good, they find their greatness. I am Stuart Roberts, and I'm really excited to introduce my new podcast, Hear Me See Me. It's just over 5 years ago. I did something that changed my life. What it did, more than I could have ever realised, it helped me. I have met some absolutely amazing people. Some of the people that work in some of these places, many of them are volunteers, but some of them it is their job. I'd had this idea after being inspired by a guy in America I'd seen cutting hair on the streets and seeing the difference it made to the guys who were there. This is more than a job, this is a calling. Hello, this is Stuart from Hear Me See Me podcast, and today I've got a very special young lady. She's got an amazing, inspirational story. I know because it comes from one of my previous guests, Jodie Keegans, who introduced us. So I'm going to let her get straight into it. Today I'm talking to Georgia Gabriel-Hooper. I nearly forgot it. I'm terrible with names. I practiced, didn't I, as well?
Yeah, I am so used to people saying it wrong. It's just become a thing now. I don't even correct them half the time. I just let them go on with it. I
get called Steve all the time, so don't worry about it. So, how are you, Georgia?
I'm not too bad, thank you. I'm very busy with college work and work itself at the minute. So it's nice. It's a welcome break to be doing something like this. I love being able to share my story and hopefully helping people. So it really is a privilege to have been asked to come and do this. So thank you very much.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. So what I'll do, because I said to you, I've not gone really into your story because I want to hear it for the first time. So, start at the beginning.
Right, the very beginning.
Yeah.
So when I was born, my mum was already in, a bad relationship. My dad was a gambler, alcoholic. He wasn't particularly faithful either, and their relationship was already collapsing, especially with his gambling, because he was not getting the returns that he was putting out. So they ended up getting divorced when I was 2. And he basically left my mum with absolutely no money. She was in severe debt for quite a large part of my life, and it really did have effects on her. He was never particularly a brilliant dad. He never has been a brilliant dad. He was around in my life for a significant period of time. He would have me for certain weekends, but a lot of that, we did have to go through Kafkas, which, a lot of people who sort of follow me on Twitter or know my story, a lot of those are family court mums or people who are interested in the family courts because, I've had my own experiences with that. They did award my dad contact with me, and, there were several accusations put out against my mum, just thrown around, really. He was awarded contact, and we had to go to a contact centre for a period of time, and then he was allowed to have me on his own afterwards. He still had, well, he still does now, have a lot of alcohol problems, and that was present even when I was little. I never wanted to stay over at his house at the weekend or, whenever I saw him, because I wasn't comfortable in that environment. It just wasn't my type of environment. Him and his family smoked in the house. So obviously, as you can imagine, my mum always used to complain because I'd come home absolutely stinking of cigarettes, and it just wasn't particularly. I enjoyed going for the day, but a lot of the time he wouldn't show up either. So it was kind of, when I did see him, we did make the most of it, and it was okay for a period of time. And then as time went on, it sort of got progressively worse, and our relationship really broke down. I'm not entirely sure why. I think possibly it probably has something to do with his new partner. I don't think she particularly wanted me around, but that's only speculation. I can't say for certain. So when I was probably around 3-ish, my mum had met someone new. He'd moved down to us from up north. And my mum had her own house at this point, and he said, "Oh, I'm not moving in with you into that house. You must sell your house and come and move into another house with me." And so they did. They bought a house together. I think my mum realised that was a massive mistake very early on, because that was financial abuse straight off, because he had her tied down to the house. If he'd have moved into my mum's house, she would have been in full control of that situation, and the house and the home, and we would still be sort of have some roots down and have some assets really. Whereas with this house, if she wanted to leave or if anything went wrong, they'd have to sell the property, and she was tied down with that. That relationship very quickly turned quite physical, not towards my mum, but towards myself. So I was quite often getting dragged up the stairs, thrown in my room, hit, all those kind of things. And a lot of the time, my mum would just stand and watch. And for me, that I really was confused for a very long time, because I was so young. I was incredibly confused as to why my mum was just standing and watching, and not intervening. But I learned as the years went by. I learned that it was actually because she was protecting me more by not stepping in. And protecting herself, because she potentially would have got hurt too. But the less that she reacted to it, the less he would do it, because he figured that, he was using me as a weapon against my mum, really. And he knew, obviously, mothers, their children are so precious to them, and fathers, if they're good fathers, their children are very precious to them. But as a maternal thing, they tend, the bond is just unbreakable, especially for myself and my mum, having the hardship that we'd already been through at this point, and my dad not being a sort of big figure in my life. So that would really hurt her, seeing me being hit and whatever. But she couldn't do anything about it, because he was an incredibly strong man, and there was no way she could have fought him off if she wanted to. And it would have just made it worse, because if she reacted, he'd have gone, I found something that works now. I found, I know this hurts her, and he'd do it more and more and more. So the less she reacted, the better. We did move out for a period of time. Fortunately, my nan and granddad, my mum's parents, lived literally on the next estate. So anytime we needed them, they were able to come round and help with the situation. I think we lived with them for sort of around 10 months ish before we sort of, respite period before we did go back. The only reason we went back was because, we needed to sell the house. This was after a few years of them being together too. This was, when the relationship was really starting to break down. We needed to go back so that the house could be sold. And, it was unfair putting so much pressure on my nan and granddad living with them for such a long period of time. So we did go back. And when we went back, he was sleeping. It was a 5-bedroom house. It was incredibly large. He was sleeping in the one bedroom, the one side of the house. And myself and my mum were sleeping in the master bedroom, because my mum didn't feel it was safe enough for me to sleep in my own bed. So I had to sleep in the master bedroom with her. And we had 3 bolts fitted to the door. We had one at the top, one in the middle, one at the bottom, to stop him getting in. Now, for me, it's only really been the last few years that I've gone, whoa, that was really not normal. That was really bad that we had to do that. For me back then, that didn't really mean anything. That wasn't significant. That was just, it was a good thing, really, because it meant that we were protected. It didn't ever feel like, oh, wow, that's really not normal. Nobody should ever have to live with locks on their door. So it's only been the last few years that I've processed that and gone, wow, that was a really dangerous situation to be in. I was young as well. I was probably only about 4, 5, 6 at this time. So my memory is sort of, very, it's faded around that situation. There's only little bits that I remember. There was a significant sort of incident. I think it was after we'd had the locks, and he'd come up to the door. It was quite late at night, and he knocked on the door, and my mum had opened it to speak to him, because she wasn't just completely shutting him out. She would sort of communicate with him. So they were talking sort of okay, reasonably well. Then my mum tried to shut the door, and he'd put his foot in the door so that she couldn't shut it.
Yeah. And
I think, from what I can remember, he then grabbed her by the collar. She had a dressing gown on. He grabbed her by the collar and started shouting at her. And being so, I was quite proactive in situations like that, as you'll find out later on in my story as well. So I just grabbed the landline straight off the thing, and I called my nan and granddad straight away, and I said to them, you've got to get here. This is brave, this is going to blow up in a minute. And fortunately, my nan and granddad did come. I mean, there were several times that they had to come over late into the night. So yeah, it was a confusing period of time for myself. And like I said, a lot of the behaviours that I learned back then, I've only sort of unlearned, you could say, the last couple of years. Sort of from my teens onwards, I've sort of processed those and learned that those aren't okay, really. Because of those behaviours, I was quite an angry child. At school, I wasn't particularly angry or upset. I was, I helped to teach a training course for the local schools in my area for domestic abuse. Yeah. And, we've done 5 sessions now, I think, and nearly every session there's been someone on it I've known. And one of those sessions, my year 1 teacher was on there. So obviously I was living in this situation at the time. I was in her class, and she listened to me tell my story, and she was absolutely blown away. She just had no idea that was happening. And I was a student in her class, and that's absolutely, that's no fault of hers. That just goes to show how well it is hidden, and it is the people you don't expect. She said afterwards, I always turned up to school with my uniform pristine, very clean. I was always happy. Most of the time I always got on with my work. I did end up leaving that school at the end of year 2 because I was really struggling to focus with work. But at that period of time in year 1, I was doing really well. I'd been bumped up a year, pretty much since I'd been at the school. I was in top 10 and we got pushed up. So I was doing really well. And she said as well, my mum always showed up to school looking pristine too. My mum was always happy, bubbly. You really couldn't tell that anything was wrong. And, I always say to people, it really is the people you don't expect. There is no black and white sort of, if you're going through domestic abuse, you will look like this. It just, that's not true at all, because there are so many different factors, that surround domestic relationships. And that's not even just, there's physical abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse. There's such a large spectrum of things that you can't just look at someone and go, they're a victim. You might be able to look at someone and go, they're definitely a victim. I can tell by that dynamic of that relationship. But, it is the people you don't expect to, the people who drive their Range Rovers, the people who, the kids turn up to school looking pristine, the kids are getting straight A's, but it is also the kids that are coming to school and lashing out, and they have behavioural issues, but it might not be those people either. Those kids who are having behavioural issues, it might not be their family. It might not be them, but it also might not be the straight A students. And those sentences I've just said don't really make sense, and it doesn't really, because you can't really pinpoint anyone at all, because it might be that person, but it might also not be that person. And the only way that we can really establish what's going on is not by looking at the person, their appearance. It's by picking up on their behaviours and the way that, you know, particularly teachers at schools, most primary schools, if not all primary schools, their parent or their guardian or whoever's picking them up has to physically be seen by a teacher so that before that child can go, so that, you know, the kid's not just wandering around on the street or being picked up by someone they're not meant to be picked up by. And it's by looking at those dynamics of how their relationship works and what happens at parents' evening. If you know that their parents in a relationship and that person doesn't come to parents' evening, you know, is there something going on there? You know, or if that person does come to parents' evening and you get to see both the parents, or, you know, the parent and the partner, you know, how is that dynamic working? And it really is all down to training. You know, it's not something that you can, unless you're a victim and you work in this field, you know, or you're a highly trained professional, there really isn't anything that, you know, you really must train to do it. It's not just an intuition thing. You can be intuitive about a lot of situations, but it's knowing what to look for. That's the main thing. And, you know, I push for and campaign for education in schools, not just for teachers but for students, because, you know, the rate is so high these days, and I personally wasn't taught anything at school about it, really. So for, you know, especially for my friends as well, my story was such an eye-opener for them, and it really was a big shock to the system. And they were like, wow, we had no idea that, not so much that this was going on in my life, but that this actually occurs. You know, it was such a big shock to a lot of them. And it just goes to show just how ignorant people are, and it's not a choice that they're ignorant. They just haven't been given that information, you know, and it really is a sad situation. Getting back to my story, I always go off on tangents. I waffle so much. I get told off for it all the time. So
back onto your story. Yeah, I think it's a very valid point before you go in, you know. What age was that? So you said I'm not good with years. So, you know, like year 1, year 2, that's
4 to 5, I think, year 1.
5. I mean, that already, that's such a young age to have that responsibility, to have that, you know, that's and what's really interesting as well, what you said is that I think it's crucial. Education is the key to all of it. And when maybe someone like yourself goes to a school, and then just the fact that kids think, because they're so clever of normalising. They're so clever of making things normal. And it's an osmosis. It just gradually creeps along. That's why if one day you went to your bedroom and had all locks on it, maybe, but this process is slow and insidious, and this is how they creep in like that, isn't it?
Yeah, that is exactly how coercive control works. I mean, you're just made to believe that things like that are normal. And for someone like myself, starting incredibly young, going through that sort of situation, why wouldn't I think that was normal?
No.
I've got nothing else to compare it to, really. The only thing you have to compare it to as a child is other families' relationships. And, your perpetrator might not let you be a part of other families, really. So you might not witness how other family units work. I mean, in my situation, my mum did have a lot of friends. We were able to see a lot of different people, and I was able to experience a lot of different family dynamics. However, I would say to my mum, well, we're not like that, or this isn't normal. Why are we in this situation? This isn't a normal situation to live in, etc. And because I didn't know any better, my mum was she had quite an easy excuse, really. She was able to say, well, they're just doing it because they put on a show in front of other people, because I didn't know any better. And I knew that we used to put on a show for other people. Yeah. We'd pretend to be happy, and I couldn't argue with that. I had no, even though I knew that she wasn't really telling me the truth, I couldn't argue with that. I couldn't say, well, how, you're wrong, because there was no reasonable evidence that I had to say otherwise. Yeah. I'm not in other people's families. I'm not behind closed doors with them. So it really was, she was quite, and after a while I just accepted that. I was like, well, that's fine then. I just accepted it. And that's kind of what happens. You're so used to just going, contradicting what you are feeling and not saying anything, just going, oh, do you know what, that's fine. You know, your words and your actions contradict everything going on in your head. Instead of speaking out and going, actually, no, that's wrong, you learn to just end up going, yeah, okay, that's fine. And that's part of the coercion of those relationships. And, you know, it spills down from the parents to the children, and quite often children do become weapons. I was quite lucky. I wasn't particularly used as a weapon for most of my life. And that was really the only situation I was a weapon in, so I got quite fortunate with that. You know, unfortunately, I've got friends who, you know, their parents and their families they split up years ago and they're still fighting over them, and you know, they really are stuck in the middle, and it's so sad. It really is. And you know, my heart does go out to my friends who are in those situations, and I'm so fortunate that I wasn't and I am not in that situation. You know, because it is just it's horrific for them. They're so conflicted too. But you know, it comes in all sorts of different forms. Like I said, there's no black and white, and unfortunately, people do still seem to think that domestic abuse is black eyes, dark sunglasses, you know, heavy foundation, you know, all those different things, and it's not at all. It comes in so many different forms. Anyway, I think I've waffled on that situation for quite a long time now. I am conscious of time as well. So, you know, my mum was able to get out of that relationship. That, you know, that was great. We got our own house. We couldn't afford to buy a house, but we did rent a house. And you know, she met someone new when I was 7, so 2 weeks after my 7th birthday. My mum had obviously been divorced before, and he'd been divorced before, and it was quite odd because both of them were good friends with their divorce lawyer, and their divorce lawyer was the same person, and he set them up. So it's quite quite strange. You know, it's a very odd situation, but he set them up on a blind date. My mum she'd never been on a blind date before. It's not her thing. And someone just said, oh, Cheryl, just go for it. So, you know, she did. She went, and she didn't expect to like him at all. But, you know, they got on well. He came across as being the most charming person, you know, very typical, but, you know, behaviour for someone who is an abuser, very charming, you know, absolutely, you know, just absolutely amazing at first. And then slowly the behaviour does start to change. So my mum was with him for 4 years, and then they got engaged. So in that first 4 years, the abuse was unbelievable, but it was not physical.
Right.
So to my mum, you know, her relationships through her entire life had been abusive before I was born. You know, so for her to then enter a relationship where it's very coercive and there's no physical sort of harm to her, I think she just thought she'd probably hit the jackpot a little bit. Yeah. And she wasn't quite as aware that was also abusive as sort of myself and other people were, because to her she was like, well, there's a man who doesn't hit me, you know, there's a man who doesn't lock me in rooms and leave me there all day. You know, she had a relationship before I was born, and she was within 10 years, and you know, some doors have like a lock at the top and you have the special key. He'd lock her in rooms and then go out for the day and leave her there. I mean, fortunately the next door neighbour was her good friend, so she used to bang the wall or scream until her, you know, and she'd given her friend a key so that she could come in and unlock her. You know, so that's an entirely different story altogether. But you know, it just goes to show that, you know, my mum was abused her whole life in those kind of relationships. And you know, she said herself, all she really wanted was just to feel loved and to be loved. And I don't think she ever really found that. But she thought she'd found it in this relationship. But yeah, he was very coercive. And that started, you know, almost immediately. He'd come over and stay every other night pretty much, because he had a son of his own who was 4 years older than me, so he would have been about 10. and him and his ex-wife had split up, obviously, and they shared custody. So my stepdad he became my stepdad. He'd have to go and he'd have his son X amount of nights in the week, and the nights he didn't have him, he'd come and stay with us. But I sort of clocked that something wasn't quite right straight away, in the sense that my mum would put me to bed like an hour and a half earlier than she would the days he wasn't there, and he'd come as I was going to bed, and it was very much that I was kept away from him. I wasn't sort of really allowed to interact with him, particularly very much, and I always, if I was around him, there was always that uncomfortable feeling of I'm not entirely sure he accepts me. He was very good to me to start with. After that sort of initial period, he owned a farm. This is how I got into farming. So he had a farm, and we would go and stay occasionally at the weekend. And he was great. He would take me around the farm. He'd let me sit in between his legs and drive the tractors and things, because I was still only quite young at the time. So I was quite heavily involved with the farm. I fell in love with it straight away. And I would help it. I thought I was helping, and I'd go and try and help him, a lot of the time. And I just wanted to be with him, really, because my dad wasn't a prominent figure in my life. So I was just desperate to have, someone sort of be a father to me, a proper father too, not just, someone who flips in and out of your life whenever they feel like it. Yeah. So, it was a very strange period, because he also just sort of walked out on my mum occasionally, very, towards the start of their relationship. My mum had two or three miscarriages, I think. It was definitely two. I think there was a third, but I can't particularly remember. And he was incredibly cruel every single time. My mum was in her 40s, and unfortunately, because she was sort of, she wasn't late, she was mid-40s, so she was coming towards the time where it was sort of, she was getting too old nearly to be having a baby at that point, and her body just couldn't cope with it, and that was the reason she lost a baby each time. And all he'd ever said to her was, I just want another child. And he really made her believe that he really reinforced that it was her fault. Every time that this happened, and he'd disappear for 2 or 3 weeks. Now that would leave me to pick up the pieces. My mum had friends and whatnot, but when it's late at night and you're alone in the house, there's no friends there, there's no one else to be supportive. So I was the one who had to do that. I mean, I never got the chance to really be a child. I had to grow up incredibly fast. I mean, right from the word go, really. I was experiencing problems with my dad. Then we had these problems with this relationship, my mum's relationship, where I was getting beaten. And, now we had this situation. And I never really had that chance to be a child and not have to worry about my mum. I didn't parent my mum in any way, shape or form, but, I was very much, I was more of an adult in that situation. And I would find myself quite frequently having to look after my mum because something had happened. She was an incredible mother. I can't particularly fault her. The opportunities that she gave me and the sacrifices she made for me to have a decent life, even out of these situations, was unbelievable. She would bend over backwards. I went to private school after I left that school that I was on about earlier. I went to private school. She bent over backwards to put me in there. She had to get a bursary. She had to sacrifice so much to the point where she would struggle to buy food every week, because she'd given up so much money for me to have such a good education and to go to such a prestigious school. And it was the upbringing that I had, regardless of those situations we were in, our relationship was amazing. She gave everything for me, and it really hurt her, particularly with this relationship where, with my stepdad, when she got married, it really hurt her to know that, she just sort of felt, I'd put Georgia through it again. When she realised this relationship was failing, and I think that was the biggest sort of guilt she had in her life. But I never really said so. I never let her feel like she'd failed me. She never failed me. That wasn't her fault. No one asks to be abused. No one walks into a relationship and goes, come on, abuse me. It's just something that happens. And, it is a really difficult situation to get out of. And there's I'll never put any blame on my mum for that. That was not her fault at all. That was just something that, came about. And unfortunately, it was really just a series of unfortunate events, to be honest. It was a really difficult situation. With the miscarriages, he ran off for weeks and he just wouldn't speak to her. When he did, he'd be really, really harsh on her. I was told by one of my mum's friends a lot later on, from these events happening, that the one night in particular, he made her sit on the kitchen table, on the wooden kitchen table, and bleed into a bucket, and he wouldn't let her go to the toilet or wouldn't let her go to bed, because according to him, she was dirty, she was this, that and the other, and it was her fault. I never heard this this didn't come from my mum, but it came from a very close trusted friend, and I have no reason to not believe that this happened. It's very much in his nature and his character to make that, to do that. And I know my mum wouldn't have told me, because she, as a mum, you try to protect your child. She in her mind, I'm trying to word this right. In her mind, she thought that she'd put me through enough already. It wasn't her fault. She hadn't put me through anything, but we had been through things together. And she felt that she'd put me through enough already, and I'd seen enough already that she didn't obviously want to put on me anymore. She didn't think that was fair. So that there are bits, even now, there's probably things I still don't know. And there's been a lot that I found out over the last 2 or 3 years that I never would have found out sort of previously. But yeah, there's still things I'll never know, and I don't know. And to be honest, they're better being with the people who do know about them, and just staying between people who were in those situations. Because he was never really directly abusive, there wasn't really, my mum didn't really quite click what was going on, but it's sort of the main sort of coercion side, it only really became noticeable what was going on, in terms of sort of when we became isolated and we moved into his house with him, sort of after the 4 years when they got engaged. My mum was threatening to leave at this point, because she said, look, I just don't see this relationship, it's not going anywhere. I haven't moved in with you, we haven't got engaged, what do you want really? Because I was going to secondary school at that point, and my mum wanted to buy a house, and to put down some roots for me, because unfortunately my dad, it's very unlikely he'll ever leave me anything. He's not supported me financially, so my mum really wanted to just put down some roots and make sure that I was having a good setup ready to go to secondary school really. And then of course he proposed, it's just, what else did we expect really? And my mum, I don't think she really felt that she could say no. And she, he'd promised us all along, well, once this happens, this will happen, and once we get engaged, this will happen, once we get married, this will happen. He used to say to me, I used to say to him, when are you going to start really acting like a dad to me? And he'd go, not until this has happened, not until we've been together for a few years, because we still might split up. And then a few years go by. Well, when are you starting to be a dad to me? And he'd go, once we're engaged, and then once I got engaged, when are you going to be a dad to me? Because you still aren't doing it. Yeah. When we get married, because we still might split up, and it carried on, and it was, until you're adopted, and then it became, you'll never have my DNA, and there's no point. And I was like, right, okay, so that's unfortunately what they do. It's just dangling the carrot. That's a very big thing of theirs. But yeah, when we moved into the farm, I never really, it was only then that things started to click. Particularly, my mum never went out anymore. And before that, she'd had a very, she used to go out loads, with her friends. She had loads of friends. She used to go out all the time. She used to do loads of things. She used to take me out she used to get so annoyed because she'd taken me out like nearly every day or every weekend from such a young age that when it came to the holidays or something, as I got older and she just wanted to stay in because she was tired or she was poorly, I'd have a fit because I'd be like, come on, I want to go out. I would never wanted to be at home. I was very restless. And she cursed herself then because she'd be like, oh, well, I've done this to myself from taking you out so young, you know. And then it got to the point where she just didn't want to go out anymore. And that was because, you know, he never explicitly said to her or to myself, you can't go out. But what he would do is if we went out or my mum went out, you'd come home and he'd be in a foul mood.
Yeah.
And he'd punish you for that and you'd get the silent treatment, etc. And, you know, then it was, oh, that was a bit odd. So you'd go out again. It would happen again. And then you keep going out. And, you know, at that point, it's still worth going out. You know, you think, oh, I'm having a better time there. I can ignore what's going on at home. But then it gets to a point where it becomes so frequent and it gets, you know, it gets more often and, you know, the moods get worse and the implications become bigger. Then, you know, it's not worth going out anymore because of the mood that you're going to have at home. So you just really, you know, so that's what happened. My mum just didn't go out anymore. She lost contact with a lot of friends. You know, she would invite friends over to sort of combat going out. And if he was there, he'd make them feel highly uncomfortable. So they never wanted to come back.
Yeah.
So at that point, you know, we lost contact with a lot of friends. And the only times my mum really did go out was to go, he played pool for our local town and he was very well known in the town. He very much was you know, Jack the lad really. And, you know, everyone knew him. And I think, you know, because he was a farmer and he drove a Range Rover, you know, his friends called him Lordy, which in itself is very, you know, high and mighty, chauvinistic.
Yeah.
And he really did feel that he was better than everyone. And he made out that he had loads more money than he did, when in reality he was just fiddling the farm books. You know, he didn't have that much money at all. But he emulated to everyone else that he did, and everyone believed that he was such this, you know, he was this big character and, you know, he was this high and mighty person, and he loved that. He loved all the attention from that, but he really wasn't. And but the only time my mum would go out was with him, you know, or a lot of the time we were left at home and he'd go to the pub on his own. For a long period of time, the only time we really saw him was if we went to the pub. And fortunately, his sort of local was a country pub, so I was allowed to go in. You know, in town, you know, most kids aren't allowed in after, I don't know, 8 o'clock or whatever it is. But, you know, I was allowed to go in, so we were actually able to go and see him and stay with him. But, you know, my mum would always sort of count his pints really, because he'd get to the point where it would be literally a 1 pint difference. He'd go from being this lovely person when he was drunk, hilarious, very generous, you know, actually quite a nice person, and then he'd have one more pint and he would turn into the most obnoxious, nasty person you've ever met. And it was a very fine line, literally a pint's difference. You know, and my mum would be counting and making, you know, checking up, oh, it's coming. And she'd try and stop him before he had that pint, because otherwise, you know, we'd just end up, or it'd be hell when we got home. You know, he never really had to physically intimidate my mum. He was 6 foot, 18 stone, used to play rugby, big guy, very big, you know, big burly farmer. And he wasn't fat, he was muscly.
Yeah.
You know, so he didn't really, and my mum was only 5'6", small, skinny blonde. You know, he didn't need to intimidate her particularly physically, because she just knew already you know, she didn't stand a chance against that. But he was incredibly intelligent. I don't think I've met anyone as intelligent as him. You know, my mum used to say, and it was true, he was wasted on being a farmer really. He could have been anyone he wanted to be. He had the brains for it. So he was quite good. You know, he was very articulate and very good with his words. And my mum, she was intelligent. She had, you know, she managed to get some really, you know, some great jobs, and she was very clever and very good at what she did. And she always loved a good challenge, but she wasn't as intelligent as him. And well, not as good with words anyway. So he was quite, easily able to tie her up in an argument or in a discussion. So a lot of the time he would belittle her, and she'd just be left feeling about, this big. And a lot of the time after a while, you just didn't bother, because you just know that you're going to get the same treatment. You either get ignored, like completely ignored, or he'd give us a silent treatment for weeks. You'd have no idea what you'd done wrong. There's one thing giving someone the silent treatment if they've done something wrong, then there's the other thing giving someone the silent treatment and refusing to even tell them what they've done wrong in the first place. So we were constantly questioning what we were doing. So he'd either ignore you or he'd just tie you up. So a lot of the time, you just didn't bother talking to him in the first place. They got married and things started to get better for a short period of time. And then once they were married, obviously it swiftly declined, because he had my mum where he wanted her. They were married. She couldn't just up and leave. It wasn't as easy as that. That was sort of the final stage of his plan, if you must say, and it really sort of did decline from there. It was sort of, so they got married in 2016, I think, July 2016. And so I was 12, I think. It was my first year at secondary school. And then as of December 2017, the relationship had already completely broken down. So the whole of 2017, he just became a changed person, horrifically changed person. I mean, don't get me wrong, harvest is an incredibly stressful time for anyone who's a farmer. Especially if you farm arable, it's it's an incredible stressful time, because that is your year's income, and if something goes wrong, if your machines break, anything like that, if the weather changes, it can be absolutely detrimental to what's going to happen to the business. And it's long hours. You've got to get everything in as quick as possible. So it is a stressful time, but he took stressful time to the next level, and he'd sort of really play it up in a way, but he'd work all day, incredibly long hours. Then he'd just go to the pub, and he wouldn't just call into the pub, have a pint on the way home. He'd call into the pub and he'd stay there all night, and then he'd roll in very early hours of the morning. But then he'd complain that he was sick of working long hours and that he was sick of not seeing us and being at home with the family. And it's like, well, it's not our fault. And then we'd get it in the neck because he wasn't coming home and he wasn't seeing us, and it would be our fault. And it's like, well, it's not our fault. We don't drive your car. We don't, we don't take you to the pub and make you stay with 4 pints down your neck, So it was quite a comical situation, really, but also horrific at the same time. But he was really going downhill, and he was saying, "Oh, I'm going to sell the farm," and he would just really, he really changed. My mum changed a lot in that period of time as well. I think there was a lot of things going on that probably I wasn't aware of. Because to be honest, I stopped listening. After a while, I just gave up getting involved and paying attention. I always had listening in there, because obviously I was incredibly protective of my mum. I was always sort of paying attention to the mood, but I just gave up listening, particularly. But my mum lost an incredible amount of weight, and she wasn't very big anyway, and she lost an incredible amount of weight, and she looked ill, actually, and she did start to get a lot of bruises. And I never personally witnessed or knew of any sort of violence, and he didn't need to be violent, but my mum was starting to develop a lot of bruises, and she'd go, I'd say, "What you done there?" "Oh, I don't know." And every answer would be, "Oh, I don't know." And I did start to become suspicious, but again, I have no evidence that ever happened. That's just speculation on my behalf. But she did start to look incredibly ill. And very stressed out, and it got to December, and they did split up. He'd come home drunk one night after shooting. I grew up around guns from being with him. I love shooting. It's part of it's in my blood, really. I mean, I do love it. I love everything about the countryside. It's something I deeply enjoy. And it's great to be part of that tradition. And he'd come home drunk from shooting. We hadn't been. My mum was in bed. It was very late at night. I was in bed. My stepsister was also staying over. She's a lot older. She's got her own children, so they were with us as well. And he decided that he wanted to talk about their relationship. My mum had been trying for months and months and months to get him to talk, and all he'd do was either roll over in bed and ignore her, or, you know, ignore her, give her the silent treatment, or just flat out refuse to talk about it. And he'd come in and he'd decided that he wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
And my mum was watching television, and, you know, she just ignored him. She just thought, do you know what? I'm going to give you a taste of your own medicine. So she just ignored him and carried on watching the TV. And this never happened before, so it was quite a shock, really. He just turned round, grabbed the TV, and went, "Oh, so you're more interested in this, are you?" Wrenched it. All the cables and everything came flying out the wall. And he must have given it a good tug, because that was in quite tight, because it was behind the unit as well, so it wasn't easy to get out. And then he smashed it on the floor. And, you know, our farmhouse was nearly 200 years old. The floorboards in there were original. They had carpet over the top, but the floorboards were the original floorboards. It ripped the carpet and put a dent in the floorboard. Now you can imagine that's going to take some force to put dent in, like solid oak floorboards. You know, so that was quite scary. I mean, it exploded. I heard it from my room. I texted my mum going, "What's going on?" I just heard this bang, but I just assumed, I mean, there was a bit of a commotion going on, so they were arguing, but I just assumed that he probably just walked into the wardrobe or something. You know, I didn't really, I never would have guessed in a million years he'd done that. He did go back downstairs, and he was messing around in his gun cabinet. Now, that was not normal. Normally, he'd come in from a shoot, he'd take his gun apart if it had been raining, and he'd leave it under the kitchen radiator to dry. And then the next morning, he'd put it all together, he'd clean his barrels, and put it away. Or if it was dry, he'd just bring it in, leave it in the back room, and then clean it the next day and put it away in the cabinet. So there was no reason for him to be going in the cabinet this late at night. He was breaking the gun, putting it back together, breaking the gun, putting it back together. You could hear that he was doing that. I was the opposite side of the house. This is a big house, and I could hear that. So, you know, he was trying to make his presence known, really, and make it known that he was playing with his gun. He came back up. He stomped very slowly up the stairs, and it was, in a very predatory way, really. And he flung open the bedroom door to their room, and he didn't have the gun, fortunately, but he made my mum believe he had the gun. And then, he said to her, he said, "If you let me walk out this door, I'm going to divorce you." And my mum just couldn't be bothered with his antics, so she was hardly going to get on her knees and start begging after what he'd just done. He left. He just got in his truck and drove off. I don't know. I think he went to his friends. I don't know, but he didn't come back that night. Myself and my stepsister came bombing out of our rooms, and we went to go see my mum. And I personally have never seen my mum so scared. It was quite a shock to me. She was shaking, like violently shaking, because she was so certain he'd had the gun. He was just the way he was acting with it. She was so certain he was going to kill her, and it was really quite disturbing to see her reaction to it. It was scary. My mum actually wanted to stay. I was the one who said, "No, we're going. I'm not staying here anymore. I don't feel safe. Let's go." Sorry, I live in a new build. These houses get so dry. We left, and we ended up staying at my stepsister's for a few days. Then we came to my nan and granddad's house. So my stepsister and my nan and granddad actually lived on the same estate at the time. So I was sort of flitting between the two houses, but my mum was mainly here. And we were there for probably about 6 weeks. And we were able to get our own property, also on the same estate. It was a house that we were renting. It wasn't very big. It was only a 3-bed, but I say 3-bed, it was a box room, really. So it was a 2-bed and a box room. So, but it was good for us, the two of us and my dog. So, it worked. And it got us away from him, really. But in that period of time, there were so many suicide threats from him. We went back for Christmas Day, and Christmas Day was horrific. We went back just to satisfy him, because he was very unstable at this time. He was one minute he was, he was begging and he was crying to us, come back. And then it would be, I hate you, you must come back to me because this is going to happen if you don't. And, it wasn't that he was mentally unstable. He was just trying every trick in the book. If crying didn't work, he'd get angry and try and threaten us and intimidate us to come back. Then when that didn't work, he'd go back to crying again. He was stalking us. He was going around to every one of our friends, either hoping to find us there or to speak to them. If he found us there, obviously he'd confront us. But if we weren't there, he'd just go into our friends and he'd try and sort of convince them that he was actually a nice guy, which they'd all figured out he wasn't. He'd cry to them and say, you must make Cheryl come back, please. He stopped eating and whatever, and he lost about 3 stone. And I think, he did it on purpose, really, to make my mum feel bad for him. She did feel bad for him. She invited him round to our new house for dinner twice, I think, because she said, look, you're not eating. He even stopped drinking. Now that was a big one because he was a big drinker. So for him to stop drinking was shocking. And she invited him around. She said, look, I'll cook you a good meal because I know you're not eating, and I don't want you to get to be unwell. That's how kind she was. She still went out and looked after him, even though he was threatening to kill himself. He was stalking us. He turned up to her workplace with a shotgun. He was sat in his car and I think he phoned her and said, if you don't come out to me, I'm gonna kill myself. And my mum also didn't want to feel responsible for his death if he did. He was never going to do it. It was all just threats and blackmail, really. But he tried. He thought she was a bit more naive than she was, and he was threatening to kill himself, thinking it was going to work. It didn't. But my mum also didn't want him to kill himself because if he did, she would feel incredibly guilty, even though it was never her fault and he never would have been. That would be solely his choice. She felt like everyone would think it was her fault and would blame her for it. He did end up having his guns taken off him because of how he was acting. But he was still driving around our house and, driving past and constantly just checking in on us. He did steal our car off my nan and granddad's drive. It was late at night. My nan and granddad had gone out and he had the spare key to my mum's car. He'd either brought his car with him and parked away from our house, or he got a taxi. I can't remember which. And he just simply got in our car because he had the spare key and drove off with it. And it wasn't until my mum looked out the window and went, where's the car gone, that we realised what he'd done. And he refused to give the car back for a few days. It was a lease hire car. It was a Range Rover Evoque. It was lease hire, and it had been put in his business's name simply for the fact that we could claim the VAT back with it being a business. Yeah. And it just overall would have been cheaper. So technically it was in his name. However, my mum was the only one that drove it, the only one that made any payments to it. She was the only one that put fuel in it, or, it was her car, just legally in his name. And he was saying, oh, well, it's my car, it's in my name, you're not having it back. And he took it and he sort of held it hostage almost for 3 days. And then he gave it back, really just suddenly out of the blue. And it was quite odd that he just had a really odd change of heart and gave it back. Little did we know that he'd actually put a tracker on it. And yeah, that's why he'd taken the car in the first place, to fit a tracker to it so he could, watch our every move. Yeah. And he gave the car back. We didn't know that. We didn't know there was a tracker on it. We probably should have looked for a tracker on it, but in that situation, you don't think to do that. This is why I think we need more education, because, we would never have even thought in a million years to just check underneath the car, see if there was a little device stuck on it. And if we had, we probably would have found it. So, we were quite naive in that situation. And we just sort of carried on life as it was. I was really starting to struggle with school. Not something that had ever really happened to me before. So it was quite odd, And I'd said to school, I said, oh, he's playing with his guns. And I immediately knew I messed up. because I'd be, as a domestic abuse victim, you're conditioned, especially as a child from a young age, to not tell anyone what's going on because, it could cause big problems. And, these people come in and they claim to help, but they don't always do, they don't always help. And, family court step in and social services step in, and, it doesn't always help, and 99% of the time they do, and they are good, but there is that 1% that it doesn't help, and it feels like it causes more hindrance than help. And especially if they don't do anything, if they just come in, assess the situation, and step out.
Yeah. As
that victim, you are going to get pummeled now because.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cheers.
And it causes more problems, but the school called Family Connect. As their protocol suggests, it was their responsibility. And then they called my mum and said, "Look, you really need to call the police." So she did call the police, and she reported him. However, she didn't say everything. She sort of gave a baseline of what was going on, but she didn't say everything, as most domestic abuse victims wouldn't.
No.
They wouldn't say much because they're not some. They are scared, but also if they don't do something about it, again, they're going to get absolutely hammered by their abuser for saying something in the first place. And she, being the nice person she was, she didn't want him to lose his guns. She said it repeatedly, "I don't want him to lose his guns," because he loved shooting, and shooting was his outlet, really. And she just thought, if he loses his guns and he can't go shooting, that's just going to come back even more at me, really. That was just going to come back more at her, and it was just going to cause even more problems, and he'd become even more unhappier. And then she thought, well, he really might go and kill himself if that happens, because he loves shooting. And she didn't want anything bad to happen to him. She just wanted the situation to go away. That was the simple thing. She just wanted it all to go away and him to just leave her alone, and for us to just get on with our life. And he didn't leave us alone. He kept coming, and it just kept going on and on and on. And the police did take his guns because of it, because of what I'd said. But the police, we're under West Mercia, but we live on the border of Staffordshire. So Staffordshire police, so where we used to live on the farm, that's Staffordshire police. But where we moved to, even though it's only 3 miles down the road, a couple miles down the road, is West Mercia. So the two forces had to communicate between each other, and they didn't do so particularly effectively. There were several issues, but there was 2 meetings that they were supposed to come and have with my mum and myself, to do an incident report, basically, and to log what had happened, just for future reference, really, and see if they need to take any more action against him. They failed to turn up to 2 meetings. This is early January of 2018. They failed to turn up to 2 meetings, and they finally turned up to the 3rd meeting. And this guy, he was a nice police officer. He interviewed us both together, which probably isn't the best thing, because my mum was obviously holding back information. As he turned up and parked outside, and I went to the door, my mum turned around and went, "Don't tell him everything. Play it down. I don't want him to get in trouble."
Yeah.
And I just went, "I'm not doing that." Then I opened the door, and she couldn't say anything then because I'd already opened the door for him. But so I said as much as I could, but my mum wouldn't particularly back me up, or she'd give me a bit of a look, or whatever, if I'd said something. And what she said, she played down. She didn't say everything. So it was difficult because he didn't get the full story, really. And he didn't have a dash checklist either, which I don't know if you're aware of them, but it's like a harm. I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but it's like a harm assessment, basically. So is it low level risk of harm, high level risk of harm, etc. And it uses specific questions to use that, and then it gives you sort of a score. I think that's how it works anyway. and it's such a useful tool that the police have, and he didn't have that. And so he couldn't accurately and effectively ask us questions to see whether we were in that low level or high level risk.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a bit of a failing on the police behalf. So, and at the end of the meeting, he said, "Oh, it's fine. He can have his guns back then." Because he's only showing sort of harmful behaviour towards himself.
Oh.
So and I was very bemused by that. I was like, right, okay. So not only I was more concerned about the fact that they'd let him have his guns back, even though he was showing that he, signs of being harmful towards himself. I was like, does his life not matter? Yeah. That was a question I had. Obviously I was more concerned about myself and my mum, but at the same time, that was also a question that was in the back of my mind. But that didn't matter anyway. To be honest, the outcome was the outcome. And him being allowed to have his guns back or not being allowed to have his guns back wouldn't have changed anything. So it was actually the next day. The next evening, my mum had gone out to the pub. She'd gone to a completely different area and nowhere that she would ever go before. I don't think she'd been there for about 10 years, 15 years at least, probably more than that. And she just went on a whim, didn't tell anyone. She just said, she literally texted a friend saying, "I'm coming to yours tonight, be ready, I'm picking you up, taking you out." Didn't even tell her friend where they were going. So there was no way that anyone would have known where they were going, because she never would have gone out of the area, so he wouldn't have known to look for her there. I ended up staying at her friend's house with her friend's daughter. I wouldn't say I was babysitting because her daughter wasn't that young, but I was the eldest. Yeah. And I was sort of looking after her daughter. We were friends anyway, so we got on. And they went, they set off, they went to the pub, everything was okay. And then I got a text from my mum saying, "Oh, Jack's just turned up." And I was like, hang on, why has he turned up? I mean, right, let me set this straight quick as well. His name legally is Andrew. So in all the news reports, it's Andrew, but his middle name was Jonathan. So people used to call him John or Jack. So I know him as Jack. So, but yeah, in the news and illegally, it's all Andrew. So I tend to flip between names. You'll see in some newspaper reports I've done, I'll call him Andrew, and then in others I call him Jack. And I just feel I just have to clear that up, otherwise it gets confusing. And then I'm like, people are going to be sitting there going, "Who's Jack?" Yeah. So I just thought I'd clear that up. So I got a text saying, "Oh, he'd shown up." So I called my mum straight away going, "Well, what's gone on? How on earth has he found you there?" And then she just went, "I think he's put a tracker on my car." And that sort of that was the moment we clicked that, bang, that's why he took the car. He put a tracker on it. So my mum wasn't entirely sure how, because with Range Rover, with the Evokes, there's like a little thing in the roof anyway, like a little GPS in there, and you can actually have it tracked, have a GPS put on the car. I believe this is what we were told when we went to go and look at it. You can have certain things done to it, so you can keep track of the car. So if it got nicked, you could fire up this thing and it would tell you where the car was. And we weren't sure if he'd said, "Oh, my wife's went off with the car," or whatever, and had that put on it, or we weren't entirely sure what it was. We were just speculating at this point, but he actually hadn't caused that much of a scene at the pub, which I was surprised about. They'd just gone outside, they'd had a conversation, it was threatening. He threatened to burn all our stuff because, we had moved into this new house, but we went from a massive farmhouse to a tiny little 2-bed house. We couldn't move everything. Most of our stuff, most of our sentimental stuff actually was still at the farm. So he was threatening to burn all that, and he would have done. That was his character type. He'd have just got the digger out, the load all out the yard, and just chucked everything in and got some petrol and just gone poof. Yeah, that was what he would have done it. And my mum texted me and she said, "Can you just call him and speak to him, please, and try and talk him down?" Now, she'd never asked me to ever really get involved before, but I'd sort of found my feet the last couple of weeks in this situation, because I was always scared of him, really. I'd never directly ask him a question myself, which is daft. I wouldn't ask a member of my own family a question. I had to ask my mum to do it. I'd say, "Mum, can you ask him this?" Because I just felt uncomfortable around him. I just felt uneasy. There was something not quite right about the whole relationship and the whole situation.
Yeah.
But I'd got a bit of a backbone, and I was standing up for myself in this period of time, and I was standing up for my mum too. And anyway, so I phoned him, and I said to my friend, I said, just record this conversation, because I have a feeling I just need you to record it. I just know you need to record it. She recorded it. And I was right. I mean, he just hurled a load of abuse at me down the phone. He'd never really spoken to me in that manner before. Basically just saying, I was 14 at the time. I'd only just turned 14. He was just saying, oh, well, you're 14, you don't know anything, just really being quite nasty. And that he was saying my mum was having an affair, and that she was pulling the wool over all of our eyes and lying to us all. She wasn't having an affair. They'd split up. She was talking to somebody. They'd only known each other probably a month, if that. They were literally just speaking, which she's well within her rights to do. Her relationship, she's ended. That's gone. That's done. Yeah. But he was convinced that she was having an affair, previously, which isn't true. He was just going crazy, and I think he hung up on me, actually, and I'd said what I needed to say, and he hung up, and I'm so glad I recorded that. Well, I got my friend to record it, because it was so vital later on. But yeah, my mum came back and picked me up, and we drove home. It was a very strange drive home. I'd said to her I wanted to call the police now, like then and there, and she'd refused, and I nearly did, but I didn't want to get in trouble with my mum, and I didn't want to make things worse, because if it all just blew over, I didn't want to be the reason that the police were called again, because obviously I was the reason they were called before with telling school. I didn't want to be that reason again, mainly because I was scared that my mum was going to tell me off for it. But I said to her, no, we're calling the police now. And she said, no. And she said, I'll do it tomorrow. And I went, you won't do it tomorrow, because I'm not with you tomorrow. And I knew she wouldn't. And she said, right, I'll do it when we get in then. And I'd kind of settled for that. I was like, that's fine. At least I know the police are being called. At least whether it's now or in 10 minutes time, okay, doesn't matter. We got home. We were talking in the car about how we'd put the track on. We were trying to figure out, was it that satellite thing, or was it something he'd stuck on? The journey passed very quickly, but it's very strange, because we were saying, oh, he knows exactly where we are right now. It was a very, very odd feeling. When we got home, we pulled up on the drive, and I literally just, I think my mum actually spotted him first. Yeah, she did. She obviously looked in her rear view, and she'd gone, oh my God, he's here. And I just looked at her, I was like, what? And he'd shot round, and he'd blocked us in the drive. So my mum couldn't go if she wanted to. It was like 11 o'clock at night, so it was dark. There was a street light behind. Obviously, when the interior light comes on in the car, you cannot see out. It's really difficult to see out. So we couldn't really see what was going on. And then there was this massive bang on the window, and he kept banging the window at the driver's side. And I couldn't really figure out what he had. It looked like he either had a piece of scaffolding, like tube, or like a shovel or something. I was like, right, okay, this isn't going to go well. Like, I've got to do something about this. So I jumped out the car, fortunately. But I'd torn my Achilles tendon at the time. So I'd already been on crutches and in a big medical boot for a couple of months. And I still couldn't walk. So I have no idea how I ran. I mean, adrenaline, obviously, adrenaline kicks in. It's great stuff. But I got out of that car and I ran. And, most people think, oh, did you run away? No, I ran directly to him. My thought process was, if I can call the police and get him away from the door, at least my mum can get out the car, because she was obviously trapped at that point. Yeah. At least you can get out the car and run, and then we'll deal with whatever happens then when it comes to it. But this all happened in the space of seconds, really. By the time I'd got out and I went around the front of the car, I got to around the registration plate sort of area of the car, probably a little bit further on. And there was this, I heard the glass smash of the car and of the window, and I thought, he's probably just banged through it. I mean, I found out later that it wasn't exactly how I thought it was at that point. But then, after the glass smashed, I'd realised he had a gun. And I was like, it's all happened very quickly.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh no, he's got a gun. It's not scaffold and pipe. It's not this, that, and the other. And before I could do anything, he'd sort of leant further into the car, and he shot her. And this shot went sort of into the neck area, so it severed the spinal cord, severed arteries, everything. So it went. It was pretty quick. It was probably pretty painless. There was really nothing that could be done at that point. And he then just turned on his heel and walked off. And I chased after him. Again, everyone thinks I'm mad. I still thought he had one shot in the barrel. I mean, I found out later on that he'd actually shot through the glass. My brain had obviously just cancelled out that first bang because I was more interested in the glass. And that first shot had gone into the chest area. So if it had just been the first shot, the possibility is that she probably would have survived, but with severe, because it took out her tricep muscle as well. She would have had severe sort of problems with her right arm, and possibly she would have had severe movement problems anyway, and probably a lot of breathing problems and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so he walked off, and I still thought he had one in the barrel at this point, so that puts me in an even more dangerous position. But I just chased after him, and I went after him. I wasn't even angry, I wasn't upset. I thought, if ever anything like that happened, I thought I'd be the person that was going up and just lamping him one, but I didn't. I think my brain probably processed the fact that I'm in a very dangerous situation here. He's got a gun. The worst thing to do is go and antagonise him. He's a big guy. I'm not going to be able to. One punch from me isn't going to really. It's not going to do a lot. I'm only quite small. I was only 14 as well, so I was even smaller. But I still chased after him, and he just got directly in the truck, and I was stood in front of his truck, and I just wanted to talk to him. I just kept saying to him, why have you done this? I just want you to tell me why you've done it. And because that was all that was going through my head. And I suddenly thought, you know what, I need to move, because if I don't move, he's already in a very heightened state. He wants to get out of here. He's just killed someone. He doesn't want to be in this area. So I need to move, otherwise he's going to run me over. And I only just got out of the way of his. He was in a big Land Rover Defender, so quite big truck. And I only just managed to get out of the way of his truck. He wheel span off. Very, very quickly, and he just drove off and went away. And he went back to his farm, and he shot himself there, but he didn't kill himself. He just caused himself extreme facial disfigurement. A massive portion of his face was shot off. He was taken to hospital by the police, by the ambulance, but the police were obviously there with him as well. And he was arrested at this point, but because of his sort of condition, he was in hospital for 10 months. They had to de-arrest him because of the fact that you can only hold someone in custody for a certain period of time, and because it was longer than that, they couldn't pay for police officers to be stood at his bed every single day. So, and because he couldn't walk, he couldn't move, so it wasn't like he was going to get up and leave, and I think he was in a locked ward anyway, so he couldn't escape. But yeah, so that ended up happening. But I went back to my mum after she shot her. Like I said earlier, I know a lot about guns. I've been around guns for a long period of time, and I know that you don't get shot from that. From that close with that caliber gun, and survive it. So I already know. You just get that feeling. I think it's partially a family thing as well. I think when you start connected to someone, you just know. And also, I've just seen this happen. I know a lot about guns. You just know. But in the back of my head, I was like, I've got to just, obviously, we're going to have to call an ambulance here and paramedics and whatever, because they're going to need to try and do what they can to save her if there is any chance. But I just need to check to see if there is any sort of because I didn't know where he'd shot her either. I couldn't see anything really, and she'd slumped over onto sort of nearly on the passenger seat really, and because the centre console was quite high, I wasn't fortunately able to see any of the wounds up here, on her, in her neck and chest. But I didn't know whether she'd been shot in the face, and I didn't know where. I protected myself. I opened the car door. I went to her, but I protected myself by not looking too far. I went to look, and I just said to myself, "No, you don't want to do that, because if she's been shot in the head, you're going to regret that the rest of your life looking at that. That's never going to leave you." So I didn't look. I chose to just remember how I knew her, because otherwise that would have just tainted, that view would have tainted everything I ever knew. So yeah, I said to her, I was like, right, if you can hear me, you do need to give me something. You do need to tell me that you're still alive. Even if you just wiggle your fingers or whatever. Which I said, obviously said that because you're taught, if you do first aid, you're taught if someone's sort of unconscious and you don't know whether they're alive, you've got to do that. You first, sort of see if there's a response there. Obviously, I didn't get a response, and I tried to feel for a pulse, and there was no pulse then either. And I knew, I was well aware of the fact that she wasn't with us anymore. But if I hadn't have checked, I'd never forgiven myself if I hadn't have done that. And then, fortunately, the next door neighbour came running out his house, and he was like, "Come on, get in!" And he practically dragged me in. Bless him, he was only in his box, this poor thing. He just jumped out of bed, and he dragged me in his house, and his partner was there, and her little girl was there. Actually, she was only 11, I think, at the time, maybe a bit younger. And that, for me, that was I didn't like that. I felt really bad that that little girl was there, and she had to sort of now get dragged into this situation. I mean, the neighbour grabbed my phone and he called the police straight away, and he sort of dealt with everything pretty much from there on. He dealt with the operator and all that kind of stuff while I was inside. I mean, the police arrived, the ambulances arrived, they did what they needed to do. I answered all the questions for the police. I directed them pretty much to where he was going to be, because there was no way he was going to go anywhere else but home. So I gave him. I basically told him where to go. Obviously, they found him and they'd taken him into hospital. I didn't find out that he was in hospital till probably the next day, I think. And I still didn't know. I found out that out through the press. I wasn't actually told that by the police. And all I knew is that he was taken to hospital with gunshot wounds, which I assumed, because obviously they'd sent the armed police to him, because if someone's got a gun, they're not going to send regular police, are they? I assumed that he'd probably, either refused to stand down or whatever, and they'd had to shoot him to be able to get to him and to make it a safe situation. Obviously, I learned afterwards that he shot himself, but we learned that through the press, which was quite not a very fun situation. You'd expect as the family, you'd be told directly by the police before it was released to the press. Yeah. That was just an unfortunate situation, though, really. It wasn't particularly pleasant, because for us there was a lot of questions. I mean, for everyone, I live in a very small town. Everyone knows everyone. There is very little crime here. It's a very nice area to live in, and to have something as particularly as severe as a murder to happen here is just unheard of. I don't think there's been anyone murdered here, at least in the last 100 years, probably. It's just unheard of around here. So it really was a big shock to the town, and everyone, was interested in being a small town. Quite gossip here, how small towns work. And everyone knows everyone. The word gets around very quickly. So before they couldn't release who'd done it, and they couldn't release my mum's name at first because her body hadn't been formally identified. So we had to wait a few days, and she'd been taken to Coventry because I think it's because it's the biggest I think it's where all the murder victims, I think, tend to go to Coventry because it's the biggest. I can't remember the exact word for it, but they do all the sort of like post-mortems and all that kind of thing there, and they're the biggest centre, I guess, for it. So we had to travel to Coventry to do that. I chose to go. So this was my mum was killed Friday night and we went Monday. I chose to go because I wasn't sure how I felt about the whole situation. So I said, you know what, I'll go. But I don't know if I'm going to go in yet. And the police were like, yeah, that's fine. So I went along. My granddad, bless him, he did the formal identification, which would have been horrific. I mean, fortunately for us, my mum wasn't shot in the face.
Yeah.
That was the biggest blessing for all of us, is that, at least he wasn't callous enough to do that. So that was a relief for all of us, really. But yeah, my granddad went, my uncle was there as well, and my nan was there. They all went in, but I chose at that time, I didn't want to go in. I said, do you know what? I was with her in her last moments. I don't need to. I don't feel I don't need to go in. So I didn't. And I was quite scared, to be honest. Death's a very odd thing. I think, even when we had dogs die and pets die, I was like, I didn't want to go near them. I was quite wary of them, and I'm a bit of a funny one, really, in those kind of situations. So I just thought, I don't need to go in. It's not for me, really. This isn't for me. I was there when it happened. I don't need to be there. So poor police drove me all the way to Coventry, driving back again for no reason. It's quite a long way from where I live as well. So yeah, and I'd been in school that morning and everyone thought I was mad. My mum was killed on the Friday night and I was in school Monday morning. I wanted to go in like normal, and the police were like, no, you can't go in like normal. And I don't think I'd quite realised what a big, such a big thing had happened, in my life at this point. And, I did go in because I wanted to make sure my friends were okay. And everyone thinks that's mad because they're like, why are you checking on your friends? Your friends are the ones who should be checking on you. And, they were. I'd had hundreds of messages over the weekend because, like I said, my mum's name hadn't been released, but the pictures were all over the newspaper. People knew my mum's car. People knew the house. People put two and two together. People aren't daft. People put two and two together. They'd figured out what happened. They didn't know who had done it. Well, a lot of people didn't know who had done it, although word got around very quickly who had done it. Even though his name wasn't actually released until that December, everyone really knew what happened. So, so I went back into school and I had a meeting with my friends, and I was very fortunate to have that. I really wanted to go and see my friends. Fortunately, they were all okay. They were just confused, like a lot of people were. No one really saw it coming. They were all just very confused, and they were like, so what's actually happened here? And I was able to fill them in, which was great, because the news, the press being the press, there was a lot of untrue things being said and contradictory things being said. So people were obviously trying to work out what's true, what's not, what's really going on here. I was sort of able to put the record straight a little bit, and have that little bit of normality, go back to school, go see my friends. I was being escorted by police everywhere. It was not a normal weekend in my life. And it was a very big adjustment. I ended up, I stayed at a friend's. I sort of moved around for a short period of time. Then I ended up staying, living with one of my friends for a few months, because I don't particularly know why. I think it was probably guilt at that period of time that I hadn't done more, but I didn't want to see my nan and granddad. They found it hard seeing me because I'm so like my mum, and obviously it was difficult for them. And I didn't want to see them because I didn't want to upset them, and I felt guilty that I hadn't done more. I'm over that now, but that period of time, that point in time, it was a big thing to adjust to. So we stayed away from each other for a while. I live here now. I mean, they're downstairs, bless them. Every time I have a meeting, I'm like, can you not come upstairs? I'm busy. But okay. You know, bless them, they're absolutely amazing. I love them to bits, and I'm so grateful to have them, because I don't really have that many. I don't have that much family. I haven't seen my dad for 5 years now. You know, even after my mum died. I mean, it's been 3 years now since my mum died. My dad still hasn't really been that much of a big sort of big figure in my life, and he still hasn't really come back into my life. It hasn't spurred him on to particularly want much to do with me, which is fine by me. I'm better off without that, to be honest. You know, and I'm happier. I'm happy to just be like I am. But yeah, you know, it took a long period of time for us to get him into court, because obviously his injuries. I mean, his injuries, even now, he can't speak. He can't, because he's got no, you know, he's missing a large portion of his face. He can't speak, eat. He can't. I don't know if he can walk very well. I mean, obviously, I haven't kept up with him for a while. But he couldn't walk the last time I saw him. You know, he literally has to type out on a keyboard everything he wants to say, and you know, he's very much he's very how do I put it? He's not in a very nice situation. Let's say that. You know, he's highly disabled now. You know, it's not a pleasant situation for him to be in. Certainly not. So yeah, we got him to court as of 2019. So yeah, it was 18 months after my mum was killed until we were able to get him in, which is quite a significant period of time. It doesn't sound very much, but when you're waiting on things and waiting on him to get better, it really is quite a significant period of time to cover. So we got into court, and you know, it took 3 weeks, I think, trial was. I was the first witness. I was offered screens and all sorts of things, but I refused. I wanted to go in open court, so I was 15, so I went in open court, first witness of the whole trial, second day of the trial, and I was still upset I couldn't go in on the first day, and I was like, they were like, you've got like 3 weeks to go, yeah? And I was like, yeah, but I wanted to come in on the first day. But obviously I couldn't, because I hadn't given my evidence at that point. So yeah, I went in, gave my evidence. I think I was only in the box about 20 minutes. Didn't take long. I was treated so well by the judge and both barristers. You know, they were very kind to me. And you know, it was good, but I was it was very nice. It was very good. It was a good feeling to be able to share my point of view and my evidence, because you know, I was the key witness in the case. So you know, it was great to be alive, actually, you know, because the police had said to me, if I hadn't got out the car, there's a chance that I probably would have been hurt too. You know, I probably would have been shot too. Not purposely by him. I mean, it might have been purposely by him, you never know. But I'm just lucky I got out the car. So it was good to be alive in that moment, and to know that what I was saying was going to have a big effect on the jury, and that was hopefully going to get him put away. I mean, it did. He ended up getting 31 years. He found guilty of murder with 31 years minimum. Before eligible for parole. I mean, he's in his 40s now anyway, so in 30 years' time, he's going to be in his 70s. So, and with his injuries, the likelihood of him coming out, it's quite low. So I've got to say, I was not expecting 31 years. I've heard so many horror stories of the judicial system failing so many people, and perpetrators only getting 5, 10, 15 years. I mean, look at Anthony Williams, the man who's just been he killed his wife in lockdown, the first lockdown, and he's only just gone through court, and he only got 5 years for strangling his wife and killing her. That was my worst fear, was that I was going to have to walk the same streets that he was. Because I was scared that he was going to come back and finish me off. I lived with that for a long time. And I was scared that even though he was in hospital, or even though he was behind bars, he was still able to get to me, just through other people. I mean, I've got over that fear now, but that really did consume me for quite a large period of time. And it was a very scary situation to be in, because nothing that anyone said made me feel any better. Even the police, it never made me feel any better. But, you know, and most nights I was at the window watching. I was ill for quite a long period of time because I had no sleep. I couldn't focus at school. You know, I was in a mess, really. I mean, after my mum died, I lost 2 stones, in less than a month. I went very skinny. You know, I lost a hell of a lot of weight, and I looked really ill. You know, and it really did take its toll on me. I mean, in my mind, I was still quite, you know, into other people, I was still quite bubbly. People would just say, I don't know how you're doing it. I mean, I went straight back to school. I was going to school full time. Well, near enough full time. They modified my timetable slightly so that I could come in a little bit later, because I wouldn't go to sleep till sunrise. Because I'd be waiting, I'd be at the window all night watching to see if anyone came to the house, because I wanted to be prepared. I was like, if he's going to come this time, I'm going to be prepared for him. So, you know, I was in a sorry state, really, but you know, I was still carrying on with normal life, and I was still. I got back on my feet very quickly, and, you know, everyone was quite surprised at that. I mean, I organised my mum's funeral myself. That was my choice. My nan and granddad said that they would do it, and I said, no, it's, you know, you expect to bury your parents. You don't expect to bury your children. As a child, as that person's child, it's your responsibility to sort the funeral out. It shouldn't be the parents' responsibility, because that's not something they ever expect to do. So, you know, I did it myself, and we had a good day, actually, which sounds mental when you say it, but you know, there was over 300 people there. It was in the half term as well, the February half term, and a lot of people had gone away on holiday because they'd all been pre-booked, and they'd said, oh, you know, we're really sorry, we actually can't come, you know, we've booked this holiday, we can't cancel it. So, you know, there was a few key people missing, which was unfortunate, but you know, it was great to have such turnout. I mean, they had to put speakers outside the church last minute because they couldn't get any more people in. And obviously people wanted to hear the service.
Yeah.
I put together a band, because my mum was a churchgoer. I've been to church since I was little with my mum, and, you know, I got a group of people out of the church community who, you know, I think, you know, one of them was a youth leader, the one was she ran the choir. Someone else, my godmother played the violin, I think. There was a few people, and I myself played the guitar. So we put a little band together. So, you know, we all played a few songs together, and that was a real privilege to be able to do that, because that's exactly what my mum would have wanted. I got everyone pretty much dancing in the church. I was like, come on, guys, you know, it's not about, you know, crying over the fact that she's gone. We've got to celebrate what she loved while she was here. So, you know, I tried to make that a good day, not a sad day. And it was really lovely. You know, my mum, I live in Newport, not South Wales, Newport, Shropshire. And, you know, my mum she moved here when she was 4. She was pretty much born and bred here, never left. So, you know, she was a Newport girl through and through. So, you know, we got to have a procession through the town, which was lovely. You know, it was just a really good day, really good send off. Sun was shining, it was brilliant. Even my dog came, it was brilliant. It was just one of those days. It was good, and, you know, it allowed me to reconnect with people who I hadn't managed to speak to for a long period of time, or people I'd never even met. You know, but my mum's death really did send shockwaves through the town. Certainly, all the churches were open with condolence books, and, you know, just a place that people could go to if they felt affected. You know, so it was amazing to see the town come together, really. You know, and most people, when someone dies, it's very common to hear people say, oh, they were such a good person, they did this, that, and, you know, they were amazing. You know, and it's quite a generic thing to hear, but not a single person said a bad word about my mum. Nobody. There was nobody, you know, even people I'd never met, people who she'd known from going to school when she was a child. Yeah. You know, not a single person had ever said a bad word about my mum. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say a bad word about my mum, ever, you know, even before she passed away. You know, so it was it was really heartwarming to see, just what an impact that my mum had on people, and how much people did love and appreciate her. When it was at the funeral, we had I chose to have a donations plate because my mum was a very charitable person. We sponsored a little girl in Africa, in Kenya, and we sent £25 a month, and we pay for her to go to school, and it paid for her books and clothes and all sorts of different things like that. Because obviously £25 a month converted into Kenyan money is quite significant.
Yeah.
But we had a donations plate, and we managed to raise over £1,500 just that day, so that was massive. And I decided to gift all of that money to the family over in Kenya. Not just to the little girl, because they had several children, and our £25 a month would just go to the little girl, so that one child. But I wanted to give it to the whole family, and since then I only found out literally about probably a month ago where they are now, but I found out that they were able to build 2 properties that they could rent out to other families, and they will there's all their children can go to school. It will continue to allow their children to go into higher education. Yeah. They're now they're one of the wealthiest families in their village. Right. And I got some pictures sent to me actually of the properties they built, and it was lovely to see. It really was. It was amazing to see, because that's people dipping into their pockets because they knew and loved my mum. And now we've been able to change someone else's life, and that's all I've wanted since my mum died. That's all I've said. All I want is to be able to change someone's life with her story and with her, with her legacy. And, we've already changed that family's life. And this is why I do so much domestic abuse campaign and so much work, because I know I've got a valuable story that can be shared, that can help other people. And, I won't stop until something's changed, until there is a big change, that we don't have, not just women, but and obviously men as well, but it's predominantly women. Until we don't have so many women dying, it's my life goal really. Now I've just happened to land myself in this situation, and there's a reason I got out that car, and there's a reason that he didn't turn around and shoot me anyway. Yeah. And I'm very fortunate, very privileged to still be alive, and I want to carry on doing good and using my story to help others.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm where I waffled for quite a long period of time, so apologies.
Oh, Georgia, that you've blown me away. There's not a lot to it. Normally I pick out and as I go through, but you've answered everything. All the questions that came in, you've answered as you've gone along. And what I would say is, so what form is this going to take now? Because you're on a mission now for the rest of your life. I can see that.
Yeah,
I understand that. I really do relate to that. What do you want to do with it now? Where do you want to go with this? Crikey.
Anywhere I can go, anywhere and everywhere. Hopefully just keep getting bigger, and I'm very fortunate to work with some amazing people. I mean, I work with Jodie, who obviously you know me through. I work with Rachel Williams, who I'm not sure if you know who she is. She was also shot by her husband, but she managed to survive. Right. She's a massive campaigner. She's written a book. She does loads of stuff, and she's actually the reason I got into this. I read her book and accidentally found her book, read it, and ended up getting in touch with her and staying in touch with her. And then she invited me to come and speak at her conference in 2019. So that was the first event I ever did. And then I just got roped into everything.
Yeah.
So, I'm a pioneer for safe lives. I work with Laura Richards as well, who you may have heard of. She's a criminal behavioural analyst. She used to work for New Scotland Yard. She now lives in America. She's very big. She does the real crime profile podcast, and she's got her own podcast now, The Crime Analyst. She does loads of stuff, and she's been the biggest factor in us getting the serial perpetrator amendment put through Parliament in the last 2 weeks. I mean, that's a bit I missed out, actually. My stepdad had a previous conviction against his ex-wife. He'd attempted to kill her, and he got away with it. He got a 4-year suspended sentence and a certain amount of hours of community service for that. So, and my mum was aware of that, but obviously he manipulated her and told her a completely different story. I mean, he told us his, it's quite common actually, but he told us his ex-wife was, a psychopath and all these different things. When I know her now, and she's lovely, and she just went through exactly the same as what my mum went through. And unfortunately it's such, it really, in that period of time, my mum she didn't know any better, and she was so manipulated by him anyway, she couldn't do anything about it anyway. And I think that was probably also one of the reasons she was scared to leave, because she knew that he was capable of doing that. Going back to that recording as well, that recording that I got my friend to do of that conversation was the only recording we have of his voice in court. So because he can't speak anymore, when he was in court, he gave his evidence through typing on a keyboard and someone else read it out for him. So that video clip that I had was the only piece of evidence in the whole case that they had of his voice. So that was a massive factor that was a massive thing for the jury, to be able to hear what he actually sounded like, and the emphasis, because when someone else is reading out a piece of paper, you don't quite know how it's... No. What the tone is. That was, the police commended me highly on that. They were like, it's a good job you recorded that. I was like, thanks. I was quite pleased that I'd had the initiative to do that. But it's just a crazy journey. I'm just, like I said, we've just had the serial perpetrator amendment go through, which means a hell of a lot to me. If he had been dealt with... Government. Yeah, this is through the government, sorry. Yeah, the House of Lords have just voted it through, so it's now gone through. So we've now got to work on what we're going to do. I mean, I've been saying for so long, we've got a sex offenders register, so why don't we have a domestic abuse offenders register? It's a no-brainer. You wouldn't let a sex offender live with a child or work with children or whatever. So why would you let an abuser live with, move in with children and abuse whoever they want? It's exactly the same principle, really. It really does mean such a lot, because like people like Jane Clough, like all these different people who've been murdered, all their perpetrators had previous offences, and they were previously known about. And even if they weren't previously known about, there were other victims that then came forward and said, well, actually, this person abused me too. And it's such a big step forward. I mean, this has been something that Laura Richards in particular, she's been fighting for this for 20 years. I've only come into this in the last 12 months, and we've all put in so much effort. I mean, thanks to Laura Richards, she's the one who got this through. It's down to her expertise and her fighting that it went through. But there are so many people who've been involved, and it really is a massive win, because it means that this register will save lives if we're able to execute it correctly, and execute it in the way that we want it to be done. It will save lives, hundreds of lives, without a shadow of a doubt. And obviously we have Clare's Law. But not a lot of people know about Clare's Law. I didn't know about Clare's Law till after my mum was killed. A lot of people don't know about it. But the problem is with Clare's Law, you have to phone the police up and say, can you tell me about so-and-so? And if that person is coming across as being really charming, you'll probably go, oh, there's no way that they'll have abused someone before. I don't feel the need to. Or they don't know what Clare's Law is in the first place to do it. So it's great, and it's a great tool to be able to have, but we need that next step now, and we've got that next step, and we've just got to keep pushing and make sure that's executed. But Yeah, I mean, in answer to your question, anywhere and everywhere, really. That's where I want to go.
But what a wonderful legacy for your mum.
Yeah, I'm so glad I could do that for her.
Yeah,
I really am.
Wonderful legacy. And it's any bad in life, if the good that comes out of it, it doesn't make up for it, but it just validates it a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. It makes it worth it almost. It happened, but my mum, for me, I said to my friends actually, and I don't really get emotional. I'm not that kind of person. I don't get upset about it very often because I've just kind of accepted it and gone on with life. And I know my mum wouldn't want me to get upset about it. But I said to my friends the other day when the amendment went through, I said, now guys, it really does, my mum really hasn't died for nothing now. And it was a very emotional moment, and it was such a privilege to have that go through, because I really feel now as if I've been involved in something big, and I've achieved, well, part of what I set out to achieve when I started this whole thing anyway. Yeah. So it really does mean a lot. But my mum taught me, she always taught me to look for the positive in everything. Yeah. If I was moaning about something, she'd go, well, yeah, but other people, obviously she'd validate my emotions. She wouldn't shut me down. But, she'd say, well, there's other people worse off in the world. There's people who don't even have a roof over their head. There's people who can't go to school. There's people who, are in horrific situations. So just be grateful for what you have. And there's something my mum used to say quite a lot. And, she wasn't a glass half full kind of person. She wasn't a glass half empty kind of person. She was just grateful to have a glass in the first place.
Yeah.
And, that's something I live by now. And, just because I've had such a horrific experience since I was young, I've also been given a gift to be able to help people. And, that to me it's a privilege, really, to be able to be in a situation where I can help so many people, and I really do, I try not to take it for granted. And, I just sort of live in that moment of going, well, actually, do you know what? I've come out the other side and it's doable. It's a privilege again to also be able to talk to other people who may have only just come out of that situation, or may just be in the process of just about to leave. And, those people might have absolutely no hope. But if they can look at my life and see how well I'm doing and how much I've come out the other side, I've seen, that it's given hope to so many people who I've spoken to. And, a lot of the time you think that there is no life after you've been abused, because you've been so conditioned that person is your only life, and that if you leave, they're never going to leave you alone, or, you're never going to get away from it. But you can build an amazing life after being abused. But I think sometimes people just need a little bit of evidence of that. And if I can just be that little bit of evidence and give someone that little bit of hope and put a smile on their face, then that's a massive win for me.
You've left me breathless. You're not emotional, but you've had me so emotional this last however long it's been. I've had to really hold back the tears on this. You are inspiring, and this is your purpose now. This is your purpose. It's given, the drive, and I keep going back to that young girl and the level-headedness you showed all the way through this. It shows incredible character, and your mum will be so proud of you. She will absolutely be so proud of you.
Thank you.
What we'll do, we'll add all the links to this of everything you're fighting for. We'll do all of that, and please, this isn't, we're going to say goodbye now, but keep in touch. Any way that I can help, I will. Not just this. It's ongoing. It's personal to me. I've had family members and this stuff, and it really is really important to me, and I admire you so much.
Thank you.
So, Georgia, thank you for giving yourself over to that, and I really, really wish you the best for the future.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be on here. When Jodie messaged me saying that you wanted to be on here, I was like, oh, that's amazing, that is. So, no, it really is a privilege to come on here. Thank you. And then you do amazing work yourself. So, it's amazing to sort of, for you to be able to use your platform and for you to have me on here. So, yeah, thank you very much.
No, it's an absolute privilege. Thank you very much. Mwah.
Welcome.
Just over 5 years ago, I did something that changed my life. What it did, more than I could have ever realised, it helped me. I have met some absolutely amazing people, some of the people that work in some of these places. Many of them are volunteers, but some of them, it is their job. This is more than a job, this is a calling.